Welcome to the Mail Time Podcast. I'm joined today by Ruby Chen. He is the father of fallen hero Itay Chen. Itay Chen fell on October 7th, and his remains were held hostage by Hamas in Gaza for 760 days before he was returned for burial. Ruby, I want to thank you for taking the time and extend my condolences to you and your family on everything that you've been through and the loss of Itay the last over 800 days ago.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And I think the highlight of any conversation I begin with is reminding that we still have Ron, really the last hostage remaining. His parents are now in Miami. My help trying to establish for them a few meetings with White House officials to make sure that when we said all the hostages till the last hostage, that's on, they need to come back.
I had the honor of getting to know Itzik and his son Omri over the past little bit of time, really going back, I think, over a year now. And I was with them yesterday. Such strong people, and obviously they're putting on a very strong face. It's a bit more lonely now, being the last remaining hostage.
Well, there are a number of hostage families, such as myself, that are providing them an envelope of support where each one gives
Absolutely.
its own unique added value. So I help with the White House and others, there's the Hamami family that help with the IDF officials. There are the Golden family that has its experience, which is unique. So we have a few families that have combined forces to provide them with any type of added value that is possible.
If someone were to ask you now how you would, obviously it's a complete whirlwind. There's different stages of what kind of information your family had over the time from October 7th until your son was finally returned. What stands out to you in terms of um, the I'd say the moment where you felt the most cohesion within all the Israeli public and ability to actually make change within the government and felt like everyone was moving in the same direction? Did you have such a moment?
There were so many ups and downs, Daniel, that it's so hard to pinpoint on a specific time. But I think the most compelling moment was, of course, the change of the administration, where
In America, right?
yes, where in Israel, there has not been a change in administration yet. What I could say is that we, the U.S. families, that built very unique, intimate rapport with NSA, Jake Sullivan, uh, the Brett McGurk, the special advisor to the Middle East, and others. We begged them not to use this topic of the hostages in a bipartisan way and wait until the new administration comes in and we lose precious time and months before the new administration is able to understand and, take over the process. And God bless, Jake and Brett. And on the other hand, when we initially met then NSA Waltz and Special Envoy Witkoff, they immediately, took upon themselves to work together with the outgoing administration. And I think that was a unique combination that allowed that January 25 deal to happen. And at the end, enabled that deal that was, some would say, took a little bit too long, but in November 25 to enable the remaining hostages to get out.
There was obviously and understandably a lot of frustration with a lot of different players in the course of October 7th until now. Do you think that if Kamala Harris had won the presidency in the United States, that we would have seen a similar result in having all but one hostage come out? Or do you think that it was uniquely the Trump administration's ability to exert the necessary force on various actors, including Israel, that allowed that to happen?
So I think that in any presidency, the apex of his power is at the beginning of the administration, as well as the opposite, which means that President Biden, towards the end of his term, was very weak, and he was maneuvered by various players in this negotiation dynamics. I am positive that President Trump and his unique style enabled him to put pressure simultaneously in a very unique way, both on the Arab negotiators as well on the state of Israel. If indeed President candidate Harris would have won, it would have been a totally different dynamics. We will never know, what if. But I'm positive that President Trump and his team did something very unique to allow all the hostages to come out.
And you have a very extensive business background. Obviously, you're born in New York, and speaking English and having that ability to understand American culture as well as being Israeli, how did that put you in a unique position as all of the hostage families navigated this horrendous tragedy?
Well, at the beginning, day number 2, my family took signs to protest in front of the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv. And we hoped to believe that being a U.S. citizen would provide him a additional shield of protection. And that's when we started to put together and understand who are the U.S. citizens that were taken hostage. Initially, there were 12 U.S. citizens taken hostage. Itay was the youngest U.S. citizen. And we understood that, at least I believed, that collectively we would have more impact on the Biden administration by going together as a team and bringing our topic to their attention and hopefully moving them to act quickly to bring the release of all the hostages. And coming from a strategy background, so you could call me the chief strategy officer of the time, where I was part of the steering committee that was nominated of the hostage forum at the time, taking leadership on the international activities on behalf of the families. And we decided that it would be impossible to be able to manage this relationship, families versus the White House, in a remote control manner. And I understood we needed somebody local in Washington, and we identified a firm that would be able to support us by the name of SKDK. D would be Anita Dunn as political advisor to President Biden. That enabled us to indeed gain access to the White House and meet President Biden at the time. And I think the U.S. citizens hostages were the spearhead of the activities with the White House. In President Biden's term, we met Jake Sullivan, I think, 24 times, either in meetings or on con calls. And he very much wanted to understand what were the dynamics of the people in Israel, what was the public opinion. And when President Trump was elected, we were able to keep that type of dialogue open with the new administration. And with President Trump, he did not take ownership just on the U.S. hostages, but actually all the hostages, living and deceased. And that was unique of him, that he also provided access not just to the U.S. hostage families, but also to all the hostage families. And I think everyone saw, how the White House welcomed families to come in and meet the president, specifically lieutenant hostages, but also my family as a U.S. citizen. We also had private meetings with the vice president, with NSA Libio, Mr. Witkoff. Dozens of meetings, calls to be able to continue pushing for the release of the last hostage.
You mentioned that you were protesting outside the U.S. Embassy 2 days after October 7th, and that you were nominated by a steering committee within the hostage forum. What was your initial interaction with the Israeli government, and did you coordinate at all in terms of messaging vis-a-vis the White House, or was this done independently?
Yeah, so we, of course, coordinated times that we came to Washington and gave heads up to the various people inside of the Israeli government, as well as to the Israeli ambassador in Washington. But we understood something very specific, that we are not the representatives of the state of Israel. We're hostage families, and we just wanted something very simple. We wanted our loved ones back. And sometimes that became somewhat vague, where we were guided to provide messaging that was more fitting for the Israeli government view, as we sometimes had a different opinion. And I think that was also what enabled us to keep the hostage issue as a bipartisan issue, meaning when we would go to Washington, we always made a point also to meet Republicans. I could share that at the last State of the Union of President Biden, my family received invitations. As you probably know, from the State of the Union, each senator, congressman receives one ticket only. So my family received tickets from Senator Jimmy Ernst from Iowa, who became a very personal good friend of ours, Senator Lindsey Graham, as well as then Senator Marco Rubio. Just as a way to say that we, the hostage families, kept this very bipartisan issue, and I think that was critical in the handover that happened between the Biden administration to the Trump administration.
As a strategist, how do you navigate the very real and major concerns that were brewing and are still brewing and are being discussed within Israel, and presenting not even a unified face, but some sort of some semblance of a face that makes sense to elected representatives in America, right? Because in Israel, you're going to have people that on day one are calling for Benjamin Netanyahu to resign and are saying he's the worst person that's ever held the office of prime minister. You're also going to have people that are not doing that and are also hostage families. And there's a wide variety of opinions and there's a lot of emotions. So taking your strategy background, how did you navigate, 10,000 opinions to present something that made some sort of coherent sense to elected officials in America?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. As you would guess, out of the 255 hostage families, they do not come with the same political views. And when we established the Hostage Forum, which is a non-government organization, which we were funded independently, no help from the government, the question was, what is the least common denominator? What allows us to have a voice that takes out the politics out of it? And I think we were able to convey that the values of the Jewish people, the Jewish faith, which is taking care of one another and being able to have each other's back, is something that has kept the Jewish people together for thousands of years, that unity. And I think those core values, especially my son as an IDF soldier, that fought on October 7th to protect civilians and saved a lot of lives on that day. You know, those values which we cherish are the ones that also dictate that the issue of the hostages, needs to be front and center. And it is unfortunate that when the government of Israel did provide its mission statement for the war, the objectives were there were three different statements of the war objectives. One was making sure that October 7th does not happen again. Number two, dismantling of Hamas. And only number three would be returning the hostages. And coming from a business background, anyone else that is listening now knows that as a CEO, at the end of the day, there's one mission statement. And when you have numerous ones, one would supersede the other. And it's unfortunate to say, but as a fact, we waited 2 years for the return of almost all the hostages. And I would argue with anybody, was that the number one objective of the government of Israel? And keeping that voice, just, keeping it very clear without any political views associated to it, but just stating the facts, I think is what enabled us to keep the hostage families more or less together and allowed us to do these meetings both in a bipartisan way where we would meet Republicans or Democrats and be able to speak. So, just if you're speaking from Miami, Senator Rick Scott, a very good friend, of the hostage families from day one. He had this big sign of all the hostages in front of his Senate office, which was fabulous to see. And he was with us. And, we didn't talk about politics. We just talked about how do you, Senator Scott, help us get the hostages out? And all of those were very receptive to that idea.
I want to turn to two issues that are a little bit more in the weeds and targeted for people that know a little bit more about what's going on. Your son obviously fell on the front lines as a hero in the IDF. What is your feeling toward the leadership of the IDF from that day? And do you think that they've taken steps to ensure that something like that wouldn't happen again for future generations of soldiers that are being asked to put their lives on the line to defend the state of Israel?
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate if you are a student of history. That's exactly the question that was asked. That's after the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And it took 50 years, and it happened again, where Israel's intelligence was blindsided. We have a lot of questions that we've asked numerous dozens of army officials as well as politicians. And I think that is the voice that at least the majority of the hostage families have, is that we need to have an independent investigation committee that is able to look and identify what were the pitfalls that created this blindside, and how do we make sure that this does not happen again. Another item that I'd like to share, a data point that most U.S. citizens are not aware of, out of the more than 2,000 uh, people, Israelis, that were killed, 47, 47 of them were U.S. citizens. And I would challenge uh, congressmen and senators that maybe it is time to have an investigation committee, a Congress investigation committee, to understand how is it that on a single day, 47 U.S. citizens were killed. If it's unable to have such a committee here in Israel because of the political standstill between the two sides.
And as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I saw a very powerful picture of yourself next to Ayala Eshel and several other bereaved families in the Knesset, as there was I believe the first draft or reading of an alternative investigation of some sort that Likud is putting forward. What are your objections to the bill that is being put forward by the Netanyahu government?
Yeah, so let's say you have an apartment, okay, and you have a outside area associated to that apartment, and that outside piece collapses and falls. Okay, you want somebody to investigate why that happened. You don't call the contractor and you ask him, well, investigate why that happened. You take an independent guy that is not related to that incident to do that investigation. And at least from my perspective and the majority of the people in Israel, they see the IDF as well as the politicians associated with the circumstances that led to October 7th. As such, the demand is to have someone that is independent, that is not related directly to that fact, with the main fact, of course, being the fact that the government of Israel, led by the prime minister, agreed to transfer millions of dollars monthly to Hamas that built a war machine that attacked Israel on October 7th. And, anyone that was looking could say, well, these people in Hamas, they did not take that money to build hospitals or build schools. What did they do with that money? Like, nobody asked that simple question. So I think there needs to be an independent entity that looks at it, that is not biased, that cannot be inflected by views of politicians. And hopefully then we will at least know the most simple question. Why did October 7th happen? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again?
Do you think that such an investigation is truly possible in Israel? I ask that because there are so many former heads of the army who are involved either in defense companies, or they're involved in politics themselves, or they have an interest due to the small size of the state of Israel. Do you think that there's a way to truly have an independent investigation? And I'm not asking that as a defense of the prime minister's proposal. I'm asking simply because there are so many moving pieces. Like, for example, Ayal Zamir, who's now the head of the IDF, was the head of the Ministry of Defense when October 7th broke out.
And before that, he was head of the uh,
Correct.
Southern Battalion, I think you call it in Hebrew, in English. So, as people that study the Torah, the Jewish people are pretty well educated. And I think out of the 10 million people that live in the state of Israel, I think we could find a few scholars that know how to study and investigate to do what is needed. And again, I would, at the point that we're speaking at this moment as a US citizen, and saying to myself, well, you know what? If the Israeli government is not capable of doing an investigation, then maybe we need to ask the US Congress to investigate, and on behalf of the 47 US citizens that were killed that day and dozens of others that were injured.
So I'm guessing that that would be one of the three questions I was going to ask you for those of us in Miami or that might cross paths with the prime minister and his visit to America. What are the three questions you would like American citizens to ask Prime Minister Netanyahu? I'm guessing that's the first one.
Well, the first one is, how do we get Ron Greeley back, which is question number one by far before any other question. I think the second question, and I think it's a bigger question, which we also see in the United States, is the polarization of views from both sides of the aisle, which is also something that we see in Israel. The fact that after such a horrendous attack and event of October 7th, we're going back to that us and them, meaning how do we divide the people instead of uniting them? And I think that the prime minister needs to reflect and ask himself, for the best of the state of Israel going forward, what is required to build that unity? And as a history lesson, again, going back to 1973, the prime minister at the time was Golda Meir. And she understood that she could not be part of the solution going forward, and she stepped down. Why? Because she thought of the better future of the state of Israel. They needed fresh blood. They needed, new people to lead. Just as it's Moses, he led for 40 years, but he knew that the next chapter needed to be with a new leadership. And I think, the biggest question that I have for the Jewish people, not just for the Jewish people living in Israel, but also in the United States and the diaspora, is how do we take this inflection point, this horrendous change that happened to the state of Israel and to the people, and how do we build something that creates that unity that is so lacking today? And it's not just the prime minister, by the way, it's also the religious leaders of the Jewish faith that I think their voice has been lost the last couple of years. And I think that is a bigger question for the diaspora Jews as well as the people that live in Israel. Think hard. How do we build that unity, which existed not that long ago, a few decades ago in the state of Israel, and has been lost? So that would be the second biggest question that I would have to the prime minister.
You bring up a number of very good points, and it's interesting to me. It seems in your line of questioning and your way of thinking that I'm not saying there's a dependency on the diaspora, but there certainly seems like the grown-ups in the room are in America from how you seem to perceive the government officials. Is that a fair representation?
No, I think that the relationship between the Jews in the United States, as well as the, this generation, I think President Biden is a good example. He is a Zionist. He called himself a Zionist many, many times, and he saved the state of Israel on October 8th. Why? Because he's a Zionist. But I think the younger generation that might be listening to us now do not have that same affiliation or those same feelings towards the state of Israel that maybe their parents and their grandparents had. So I view this as an inflection point that needs to be seized and used to redefine the relationship between the Jews and the diaspora, specifically in North America, and the state of Israel, which I think again, goes back to that unity. And what are the values that exist in the majority of the Jews in the United States, and how does it reflect on actions of the State of Israel? And I think that the State of Israel built a very nice mechanism where they asked for the Jews in the United States, give us, donations, and no strings attached. We'll do with it whatever we want. And I think maybe we're at a point in time where, that needs to be emphasized and reevaluated about, how is that relationship between the Jews and the United States and the State of Israel?
I completely agree with you. And I also want to say, what's going to happen is after I post this episode, I'm going to have a horde of right-wing people say, oh my God, he said a nice thing about President Biden and you didn't push back. Well, I'll say this. On October 8th, if President Biden didn't do what he did, there might not have been a State of Israel. So it might be uncomfortable for some people who live in a right-wing echo chamber. President Biden saved Israel that day. If you remember, on October 7th, the first call Yoav Gallant made was to Lloyd Austin. Love him or hate him, that was the first call, because Israel needed the United States, still needs the United States.
If
and
it
that's just
wasn't
a
for the
fact.
United States after months,
Correct.
Israel would be left with sticks and stones to fight off Hamas. It's very simple.
Correct. So my point being is that you might have disagreements. I have plenty of issues I could raise about President Biden, but a simple fact that you stated has to be very clear that yes, he did do that. Yes, he stood and actually said, I'm a Zionist, which took some courage. And it's important to recognize that. And and in your call for unity, I really do think that conversations like this, where people can actually have multiple facts and multiple truths, and you can actually say, how do you reconcile some good someone did, perhaps some bad, whatever it might be, but you can actually have a discussion about it and come to a reasonable conclusion and see where people
So let me just
fall,
give
and
the
that's
other
fine.
side of of it as well. After a month and a half, I think, meeting Jake Sullivan for the second or third time, I looked at him and said, Jake, what's plan B? Plan A isn't working. What's plan B? And he looked at me. There's no plan B. And I said, that doesn't make any sense. Go back and figure out a plan B, because we can't be doing this hostage thing for 2 years. And it's unfortunate, but the United States went according to the playbook. And I told Jake, I told then Secretary of State Blinken, throw the playbook out the window. You need to reevaluate, come up with a different plan, because the way that you talk to the Arabs doesn't make sense. So again, it's a bipartisan issue. Like, I don't care about politics. And it goes back to what I said, that, people are automatically boxed into a place and, oh, well, okay, so he's that, or he's that. No, you could, like you said, Daniel, we could have a conversation that I could speak and provide comments and thoughts on the Democrats as well as the Republicans. But I focused on the issues. Like, let's talk about the facts. And I think it's unfortunate, going back to what I said again, Jews, the younger generation, they build their opinion after 30 seconds on a TikTok. And that's not the previous generation where, the news was the news. And, you had Walter Cronkite. Everybody believed what he had to say. That was the sleuth. But nowadays, it's very much based on opinions of the people that are presenting the facts. And I think it's very difficult for the younger generation to understand what are the issues in the State of Israel. And all that Free Palestine stuff, I sometimes walk up to protesters and ask them a very simple question. Are you a patriotic U.S. citizen? Yes, I am. Of course I am. Do you know, sir, 47 U.S. citizens were killed by Hamas, the people that you are so much in love with? They would take a second, they needed to process that, because it's, not something that they know. And then you could finally have a conversation. And I think here as well, that conversation, I think, is lacking, because people, predetermined, where they stand, and they can't, think about the facts for a second. So that's my call to the people in the United States, not just the Jews, but also, we have the evangelists that also have, very,
Right.
very specific opinions about the State of Israel. And Israel is complicated. If it was so easy, we would have fixed it, maybe 50, 60 years ago. So because of that, okay, let's talk about it and figure out, how do we make sure that October 7th doesn't happen again? How do we make Abraham Accords 1.0 turn into Abraham Accords 2.0? And I think Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, they are in a unique position to bring Abraham Accords 2.0 because of what happened on October 7th. And that is a window of opportunity that we need to make sure happens, and we need to push them to secure the well-being of the future of the state of Israel. And that in parallel needs to happen with the relationships, as I said, of the Jews in the United States and the state of Israel.
Ruby Chen, I really appreciate you taking the time. God willing, by the time I even post this, Ron Feely will be returned. And
Amen.
of course, we're all thinking of and remembering Itay. If you could please, if you have any fundraising or memorial projects that are in process, if you could please send them to me. I'd love to put them in the show notes so people can contribute. And I really do appreciate you taking the time.
www.bringitayhome.com. It comes to our page of Itay and all the good things that we want to do on his family and on his behalf.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.